When someone takes psilocybin, what really determines what their journey is going to be like? Is it going to be this profound, mystical experience that totally changes their outlook on life? Or could it be a really challenging, even distressing ordeal? It's a question that's been shrouded in mystery for a long, long time. But a recent scientific study decided to go looking for clues. And trust me, what they found is pretty fascinating.
So, this is the big question researchers are trying to crack. As psychedelics start moving from the fringe into mainstream therapy, being able to anticipate what kind of experience a person might have, well, it isn't just helpful, it's absolutely crucial for safety and for effectiveness. So, can science actually give us a roadmap before the trip even begins?
Okay, so first things first, let's get on the same page with what we're talking about. In the world of psychedelic research, these are really the two key outcomes. On one hand, you've got the mystical experience. Scientists often call this oceanic boundlessness, or OBN for short. This is that feeling of unity, deep insight, and transcendence. Then on the other side, you have the challenging experience, which they measure as dread of ego dissolution, or DED. This is where things like anxiety and that scary feeling of losing control can creep in. The big goal here is to figure out what pushes the needle one way or the other.
All right, so that brings us to the investigation itself. We're going to be diving into a 2023 study by Kwan-Mo Ko and his colleagues over at King's College London. What they did was they dug back into the data from a previous clinical trial, basically searching for clues that could predict these experiences among 89 healthy volunteers. Let's think about this like a detective story, right? The researchers had all this data and a big mystery to solve. They identified several potential leads, different variables that they thought might influence how intense a psilocybin trip gets. So let's take a look at the clues they started to follow. The first and, let's be honest, the most obvious suspect was the dose. I mean, it's a logical place to start, right? The participants in the original study got one of three things: a placebo with 0 psilocybin, a 10 milligram dose, or a higher 25 milligram dose.
Okay, next up, they looked at factors that were unique to each person. Did their age matter? How about their biological sex? And what about this one? Did having previous experience with psychedelics make any difference in how they reacted this time around?
And then there's the third big clue they followed: personality. Using the well-known Big Five model, the researchers really had their eye on two traits in particular. Their hunch was that openness to experience might be a ticket to a more mystical journey, while neuroticism could be a potential warning sign for a challenging one.
So, after they analyzed all these potential leads, what did the data actually show them? Okay, this is where things get really, really interesting. Let's break down which of these clues actually led to a breakthrough. The single biggest predictor by a long shot was dosage. Now, this might sound a little obvious, but the data confirmed it with such clarity. The amount of psilocybin a person took had a direct and incredibly powerful relationship with how intense their experience was.
And you can see it so clearly right here. On the left, we've got the mystical experiences. On the right, the challenging ones. Just look at how both the 10 milligram and the 25 milligram doses just tower over the placebo. But here's the crucial point. This was true for both types of experience. A higher dose didn't just predict a more mystical trip or a more challenging one. It predicted a more intense experience, period. It's like it just turns up the volume on everything.
But here's the thing. Dosage wasn't the only clue that actually led somewhere. The data pointed to another significant factor, and this one was about the individual themselves, their age.
So check out this scatter plot. See that trend line sloping downwards? It's showing a really clear negative correlation. Basically, to put it simply, as participants got older, they reported significantly less intense, challenging experiences. The authors think that maybe age acts as a kind of protective factor, perhaps because of better coping skills you develop over a lifetime. Pretty interesting, right?
You know, any good investigation is just as much about the leads that go cold as the ones that pan out. A whole bunch of factors that researchers and, frankly, a lot of people in the psychedelic community thought would be predictive, well, in this study, they just didn't show a strong connection.
And honestly, some of these results were genuinely surprising. That long-held idea that being more open to experience means you'll have a more mystical trip? Nope, not supported here. Your mood right before the trip didn't show a significant link. Whether you'd used psilocybin before didn't seem to matter. Biological sex showed no link either. It's a huge reminder of just how complex all of this really is.
But there was one little twist when it came to personality. This quote from the paper points to something a bit more nuanced. While neuroticism wasn't a predictor across the board, it did show a connection specifically at that highest 25 milligram dose. So at that high dose level, people who scored higher in neuroticism were more likely to report a challenging experience. It's not a simple factor. It actually interacts with the dose.
So let's pull back for a second and look at the big picture here. We've got a couple of strong clues, dose and age, and then a lot of other factors that seem less important, at least in this specific context. But it's so important to understand the limitations of this study and what it all means for future research.
And this is a really crucial point. We have to remember, this study was what's called a post hoc analysis. Think of it like a detective reopening an old case file to look for clues they might have missed the first time. It's a fantastic way to spot potential patterns and generate new ideas, but it is not designed for definitive proof. So these findings, they're really promising leads, but they're not yet proven facts.
So where do we go from here? Well, the authors actually lay out a pretty clear roadmap. First, these findings need to be tested in much larger and more diverse groups of people to see if they still hold up. Second, researchers can start using new methods like large-scale surveys and citizen science projects to gather way more data. And third, and this is so key for therapeutic use, they've got to compare results between healthy volunteers and clinical populations to see if the predictors are the same for, say, someone with depression.
And all of this brings us to one last, kind of philosophical question. The whole goal of science is to understand, to predict, and to control. But for something as deeply personal and mysterious as a psychedelic journey, you have to wonder, if we could map out the entire experience beforehand, would we lose the very mystery that makes it so profound in the first place? Something to think about.